I never thought of it as white privilege. I just thought if you do the right thing, people will do the right thing where you're concerned. And because I'm white, they did. And they were wrong. Because I've been doing the wrong thing for about 33 years, I did the wrong thing. I thought I was all right. And then I did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise. And I watched a brilliant little blue-eyed white girl turn into a frightened, intimidated, unable to learn child in the space of 15 minutes because I accused her of not being smart enough because she had the wrong color eyes. And I watched 4 dyslexic brown-eyed boys read words they had never been able to read and spell words they had never been able to spell because nobody had ever told them that they could learn to read or spell. But on the day they had brown eyes, it was obvious that the world was theirs. They could do anything. I found out about expectations that day, and I realized that what we have done, what we white folks have done in this country, ever since we got here, is treat people positively or negatively, not on the basis of the color of their skin, but on the basis of our ignorance about skin color, where it comes from and what it causes. This is not about skin color, this is about ignorance. And the answer to ignorance is education. It is not indoctrination, it is not schooling, it is not training, it is education. But you have to have teachers who know better if they're going to teach better. And teachers can only teach what they know. And unfortunately for all of us, we've all been led down the same ugly path of thinking that it's all right to claim privilege when what we should be claiming is ignorance. We've got the wrong word here, people. This problem is white ignorance. And white people are running the show. Now you're going to think she's a traitor to her race. I'm not a traitor to the human race, and that's the only race I see. Make no mistake about that. And as long as we keep on acting as though there are several races, we can have panels like this at which we discuss white privilege instead of discussing white ignorance and deciding to do something about it. We need to start really furnishing education in these schools instead of furnishing indoctrination. Did that answer your question?
Yes, partially.
All right.
The rest of the question is, so how did you become aware of your own privilege or of others having more privilege than you? You're talking about...
I watched my students.
It was watching the students.
And I realized, watching them, that they were exhibiting the behaviors that they were copying from me. They acted hey, my little brown-eyed students, the day they were on the top in that exercise, became me. And it made me sick to my stomach, and it does to this day. I hate to remember that day, because I watched my brown-eyed children we just loved one another in my classroom. We really did. And on that day, I found out that I don't want to be tolerated. Because in that classroom, my kids tolerated me because I'm blue-eyed. The first thing that was said after I told the kids that blue-eyed people aren't as smart as brown-eyed people, a little brown-eyed child in the front row, Debbie Hughes, looked up at me and said, "How come you're the teacher here if you got them blue eyes?" I got a real experience that day, and a real educational experience, people. I found out how I look to people of color. And I have spent the last 50 years trying not to look like that and trying to encourage others to stop it. I'll tell you another thing. Do I have a few more minutes here? My father, at the age of 60, watched the film that the CBC made in my classroom the second year I did the exercise. They sent me a copy of it, and I showed it to my father and my mother. My father was 60 years old, the most honest man, the most moral man I've ever known. I showed him that film. When it was over, he stood up, and in his bib overalls and his blue chambray shirt rolled up to the elbows, he reached in his back pocket, took out his red handkerchief, and with tears in his eyes, he blew his nose and said, "I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old." You can criticize what I do until the cows come home. And psychologists do until they get smart. I don't listen anymore because my father said, "I wish somebody had taught me that when I was 9 years old." If somebody had taught my father that when he was 9 years old, we would never have had to listen to some of the ridiculous racist remarks that he made. and he never made them again after he watched that film. Don't tell me that you can't change people. Don't tell me that you're too old to change. There isn't a person in this room who is too old to change. White folks, you got to change, because within 30 years, you will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. And you had better pray to whoever you pray to or for, that people of color are not going to get even with us and treat us the way we have treated them. If you can't think of any other reason for treating people like equal human beings, think of that one. Because what you do today is creating the future. I don't think you want the kind of future that you have provided for people in the present. I may be mistaken. You may not know what's going on. You know what's going on. And if I asked you, if every white person in this room who wants to be treated the way we have treated people of color in this country, if you'd like to be treated that way, all you white folks, if you want that for the rest of your life, please stand. Did you understand the directions? If you're white and you think blacks have got it so good in this country and you want to be treated the way they have been for the rest of your life, just stand up. You know why you aren't standing. You know it's ugly, and you know it's happening, and you know you don't want it to happen to you. So I want to know why you're so willing to allow it for others in this post-racial society. Another question?
Okay, so we're talking about privilege and how you first became aware that others had more privilege than you, and how you might have been aware that you had more privilege than others.
Okay, first of all, I think it is important to emphasize the notion of privilege, but privilege, as Jane pointed out...
How long she thinks this has been going on, this racism against blacks. How long do you think it's been going on? Forever? You're wrong. 500 years.
Yeah.
During the Spanish Inquisition, the people who were running the Spanish Inquisition and killing people because of their religion found out that they killed a whole lot of people who had the right religion. They couldn't tell what their religion is by looking at them. So they decided they had to find another way to identify the people that they were going to kill and enslave, So they set upon skin color. People, it's only 500 years old. Now think of that. It's only 500 years old. Nobody was born a racist. There is no gene for bigotry. You were not born a racist. You have to be taught to be a racist, and you have to be carefully taught. And if you haven't seen that musical, in which the last song is, you have to be taught to be afraid of people whose skin is a different shade, of people whose eyes are differently made. You have to be carefully taught.
South Pacific.
Yes, South Pacific. You have to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You have to be carefully taught. And that's what we have to do in this country to keep this racism alive. If we want racism to stop, we have to stop teaching racism. In our homes, in our churches, people, Jesus did not look like the little Pillsbury Doughboy. And God is not an old white man with a long gray beard that looks like Charlton Heston playing Moses. And Mary did not have pale skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. Get over it. And do it now. You can make a difference if you choose to, you young people. How many of you have parents, mothers, who are really tired of sending Christmas cards? I'll tell you how to solve that problem. Go down to the store, buy a box of Christmas cards with the Holy Family picture on it. Take it home, color them right. When your mother sends those out this year, she'll never get another Christmas card from most of those people. People, we have to absolutely refuse to tolerate the intolerable. Elie Wiesel said, you must not tolerate the intolerable. And if it's intolerable for you, my cousins, then by the gods of war, it's intolerable for me, and I will not tolerate it. This has gone on long enough. This has gone on long enough. And we have gone along to get along long enough. We need to put a stop to it. And you can. Educators can. Educators can change this. If I can, you can. Get busy. But first,
this is a question that fits right with what you're saying. How can we talk about race and privilege with openness and inclusiveness in a way that prevents people from shutting down?
people can shut down or not, that's up to them.
Okay.
Let me tell you something. I am not responsible for how you respond to me. You got it? I flat out don't care. If you learn something in here this evening from this woman who has forgotten more than I'll ever know about racism, and what little I know, if you decide to learn something in here tonight, you'll learn something. If you decide to be mad, you'll be mad. Go ahead, I don't care. That's your problem, not mine. I am not responsible for how you feel. I am responsible for what I say. I'm responsible for what I do. You're responsible for your response to it. Be responsible for your responses. I'm not responsible for it.
Okay, I want to hear what Angela has to say to this.
Well, I totally agree with Jane.
Okay.
How can I not?
Accept that.
As someone who has spent many years teaching university students, teaching graduate students, I've learned that it makes no sense for me to simply tell my students what it is I think they ought to know. You know, they might learn enough to write a good paper, and then they'll move on, moving in another direction. So I've come to the conclusion that teaching really is about helping people to ask the right questions, to ask the right questions, and to be able to come to the conclusion themselves that there is something really terribly wrong with the way racism has shaped the history of this planet. So I think education is about unleashing the imagination. What teachers, unfortunately, most often do is shut down the imagination and to prevent people from exploring the world in their own ways. And so I think that certainly...
to this group.
So who's first?
Who's first? Oh, I'm first?
Yeah.
Turn off your television. Pick up a book. Go out of your way to meet somebody you would never have wanted to meet before. Look at that person as a cousin and say, I want to know what I can do to make my life less